Hello, gunfighters, and welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting and gun-related stuff the right way with God at the center. Gonna try something a little bit different. You guys are probably familiar if you've listened for any length of time. The Better Know a Cartridge episodes. They're kind of short episodes on a pretty particular topic, so I think I'm gonna forego the lengthy bio. Try to abbreviate it. First and foremost, I am a Christian. That is number one in my life, serving God, following Jesus. Combat veteran, served in the United States Marine Corps and the Army. Also law enforcement veteran, private contractor, state rifle and pistol champion. Pretty succinct. You want to support? Go to Patreon. Should be a link in the show notes. Boom. Let's get into the day's cartridge. So, this morning, when I checked some stats, mostly because one of the patrons wanted to know about a certain episode, I saw yesterday we had 270 downloads, which is very blessed for, and that's 270 downloads, not listens. I don't know what the ratio to that is, but that's a fairly good day for the kind of day that it was. And I started thinking, 270. So guess what? Today's cartridge talk is going to be the 270. Now, I'm going to start off talking about what the 270 is in its basic form. If you're familiar with the 30-06, and if you're listening to cartridge talks, you probably are. Probably the father or grandfather of most, not all, but most modern rifle cartridges. All the ones necked up or down from that, the 270 being among them, and then the 308, a shorter version of the 30-06, necked up or necked down to a bunch of the different variants. So you take that storied classic 30-06 and you neck it down to .277 caliber, or 270. If you're doing it in metric, it would be 6.8. You take that 30-06 and you neck it down. You do this necking down. It's real common in wildcatting, necking up or necking down, but you neck down in general to get similar powder capacity with lighter, smaller diameter bullets, thus achieving more velocity and a flatter trajectory, at least out to a point. A lot of that depends on BC, but for the sake of argument, you take that 30-06 and you turn it into a 270, and I know that's not exactly correct because I do believe the 270 is a 30-03 case, neck down, because the neck's a little bit longer, but for all practical purposes, let's just concede that it's a 30-06 neck down to 270. Why would one take the great 30-06 and diminish it by putting a smaller bullet on it to achieve greater velocities? Well, I would concede that for a lot of things, deer-sized game, you don't need a 30-06. I'm not saying you can't use a 30-06 or the 30-06 is not great for deer. It certainly is, and it's probably put more deer in the freezer than 270. But you have some superfluity there. You have more than is necessary. By necking it down to .277, you still have plenty for whitetail, mule deer, pronghorn, sheep, and even elk. Plenty of elk have been put down, and it's probably, at least in times of yore, been one of the most popular elk cartridges out west. It'll do all that, and you get a lighter bullet, faster moving, flatter trajectory, at least out to a point, up to let's say 300 or 400 yards, which prior to rangefinders was about as far as you were probably going to be able to shoot anyway, at least ethically. So this 270 came out back in the 1920s. And back in the day, we didn't have the internet. And one name above many others made this cartridge really popular, and that was a gun writer by the name of Jack O'Connor. If you're not into the old school, like gun culture 1.0, if you came in the time of ARs and Glock 19s, that's fine, but a lot of really storied names shaped the gun world as we know it today. One of those, Jack O'Connor, another one, Elmer Keefe, another one, Colonel Jeff Cooper. O'Connor really, I believe, brought this from an obscure kind of cartridge into like a main American cartridge by his writings. I believe was a big part of the success of this cartridge. To let you know, like, the time period, we all kind of that love hunting in the golden era of hunting, we think of the pre-64 Winchester Model 70. Well, this cartridge predates that even. This came out in the Model 54 bolt action rifle in 1925. And again, Jack O'Connor made it popular. He hunted all kinds of things with it. Wrote about them back in the day when there wasn't a bunch of people on YouTube writing about the next latest and greatest gun. You had a few prominent gun writers, and he was one, and he really liked the 270, and he proved its worth in hunting a lot of big game animals with it. Let's look at some raw numbers. I'm looking at, and a lot of the information I'm going to quote to you today, including some I already read, is from Cartridges of the World. So I want to give credit where credit is due. Some of it I just knew, and who knows where I picked it up over the years. But kind of your classic, quintessential, I think, 270 load is going to be your 130 grain. And I know some people like 140s. I know some people like all kinds of different stuff. But 130 grain listed in this book, 130 grain factory load at 3,060 feet per second. That's a factory load. Or let's say hand load, 130 grain at 3160. Now, in the same manual, to compare apples to apples, kind of your quintessential 30-06 load is 150 grain at 2920. And a hand load of 150 grain at 3,000. To give you some rough numbers and some rough idea, this is a full-powered rifle cartridge. Yes, it may be smaller than the 30-06, but it's quite a bit bigger than like an AR round, a 5.56. It's in a different ballpark. It's not an intermediate round. It is a full-powered rifle round. So don't think that somehow because it's maybe less powerful or smaller projectile than the 30-06 that it's not a full-power rifle round. It certainly is that. And it has proven itself again on pretty much most North American big game. I don't know that I would choose it for brown bear, but for pretty much anything else, it has put plenty of elk in the dirt. It has put plenty of deer, both mule deer and whitetail deer. I got to imagine sheep. This was a long-range cartridge, like one of the preeminent long-range cartridges until we get into like the Gen 4 cartridges. If you haven't listened to that episode and you don't really understand some of this, you might go back and listen to Cartridge Generations where I talk about all the developments. Before laser rangefinders, when you could know that an animal was 420 yards away versus 380, because that makes a big difference, and you can't generally tell that with the naked eye. Flat shooting cartridge is what you wanted, a bullet with a lot of velocity shooting fairly flat that you could have a long point blank range. I mean, you could aim at the center of that animal and hit it somewhere in the vitals and stretch that distance out. That was considered a long range cartridge up until laser rangefinders, and you could arc that bullet in, and the flat trajectory wasn't as important as the predictability, which is when we get into like the 6.5 Creedmoor. But anyway, the 6.5 Creedmoor, I think, was the first one of these mainstream cartridges. It didn't come out to 2007. This old girl came out in 1925, and it has proven itself. And there's something to be said for a round with street cred, with a reputation for putting meat from off a cloven hoof and onto the table. There's something to be said for those cartridges, and this 270 certainly has that. Because of the way felt recoil works, when you reduce the mass of this projectile and up the velocity, you may maintain similar power levels, but reduce recoil. And I like that. I like reduced recoil. Again, especially, it's still way more than enough for deer, and I would submit plenty for elk. It is a good balance of that. I will use the caveat, bullet construction is important. I say again, bullet construction is important. Much more important in most cases than caliber. I know this will be controversial, but I have taken, not that I wouldn't hunt elk with bigger than this, but I've taken every elk that I've ever taken with a 243 with proper bullet construction and proper shot placement. Not advised that as a great elk cartridge. It's what I had in a light handy mountain rifle at the time, and it works with proper bullet placement and proper bullet construction. I would rather have a 243 with great bullet construction, like on a hand load that I worked up, than a 30-06 full metal jacket, because it's got crappy bullet construction. Bullet construction is important. But, again, with proper bullet construction, a 270 is fine for elk. And some people will say it's underpowered, but I'd say there's plenty of dead elk that will prove the point that it's sufficient. We talked about one step up, and it's Dad, the 30-06. One step down will be the 25-06. If you want to stay in that similar cartridge, long range performance. And I would argue that the 25-06 is as good or better for deer and pronghorn. But I would say the 270 is a sweet balance of still great for deer. It's probably a little bit more than you need, but I mean, again, plenty of people use 30-06 and it's just fine, and it's a great cartridge, or 308 for that matter. Different philosophies, 308 is going to, in general, have a bigger bullet going a slower velocity, but the 270 and 308, as far as power goes, I'd say they're fairly similar. Again, different. Terminal performance is going to be different because you're dealing with high velocities, smaller bullets, but I think for intents and purposes, the amount of power on a deer is about the same. They're both good cartridges. But if you want to step up, and here's the sweet spot for the 270, if you live out west and you want to, or you have it in your heart that one day you want to hunt elk, 270 does that a little bit better. You get a little bit more bullet, and you get a little bit flatter trajectory, I think, than common. And you can hand load and finagle things and compare cherry pick one load to another. But in general, in common loadings, a little bit flatter trajectory with the 270. I think that's one of the reasons, especially out west, it has such a good reputation. If you're stepping up into elk, you're mostly going to hunt deer because most places, even for decades now, have had a limit on like one elk, if you even draw an elk tag. But you can shoot quite a few deer sometimes. So if you're mostly going to hunt deer and then occasionally step up to the elk size game, I think the 270 does it better. Even me, who loves the 243, I will concede I limit myself quite a bit in the distance I will shoot elk with a 243 and the shot angles. I pretty much limit myself to very specific shot angles with a 243 if I want to do it ethically, and I do. There are plenty of shots and shot angles with the proper bullet construction that I would take with a 270 that I would not take with a 243. And where I would like to keep my shots with a 243 inside 200 yards on elk, I would happily extend that same ethical range to 300 yards with a 270 with the exact same shots, assuming I had the shot. And that's the mark of a great hunter. One of the marks of a great hunter, and I would respect this when I was guiding, as I was a professional big game hunter and guide, I would really respect the client that wouldn't take a shot because he knew he couldn't take it, or he didn't feel confident that he would take it. That, to me, speaks volumes about a hunter than a hunter that will just randomly shoot at something when he doesn't know that he can hit it. Now, there's always weird things that could happen, but say a good 90%, like if you don't know, if you don't have a reasonable expectation, a reasonable and prudent expectation you're going to hit the vitals of that animal, then don't take that shot. But the 270, I think, gives you a little bit more, especially moving into elk size game over like a 243. It's a good round for that. It's mild recoiling. It's classic. So if you want something today, you don't plan on running around with computers and super long range rifles that weigh 18 pounds. You want a classic hunting rifle and a good classic cartridge that will hunt deer and slay them if you do your job. And it'll take elk just fine because plenty of elk have been taken with it. And it's super flat shooting compared to cartridges of its era. And you want to extend that point blank range. I think the 270 still has a place. I don't think that you always need to bump it up to like the new hotness, the 6.8 Western, which is not a bad cartridge. If you're not hunting with a laser rangefinder, I'm not real sure you're getting much out of it. It's been a good cartridge for decades. I don't even own one. I never have, and I don't know that I ever will. Maybe I would. I honestly haven't bought guns recently because I'd like to be a good steward of the podcast money and give you guys more podcasts by doing this full time. But I still think it's a good cartridge, and I know kind of its reputation and its history. Is it as flexible as a 30-06? No, it's not, right? I can, with a 30-06, and I don't own a 30-06 either, but I could load down to a 110 grain, 100 grain bullet. Can load all the way up to a 220 grain bullet. You're not doing that with the 270. But if you don't need both of those extremes, right? You want to shoot from like 110 grain to 130, 140 grain bullet. With hand loads and stuff, you can load outside those parameters. But if you're hunting deer size or up to elk game at those kind of reasonable ranges, 300 yards, it's great for that. It's kind of the sweet spot of it. Is it as flexible as a 30-06? No. Is it as popular as a 308? No. Is it a good classic hunting cartridge that's still good and still kills deer and elk? Absolutely. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the 270. A great cartridge. There's another episode you can look up comparing the 270 to the 6.8 Western to the 270 Wisdom Winchester Short Mag. You might check that one out. But I thought, with all the cartridge talks I've done, the 270 certainly has a place in Americana and kind of that classic age of hunting. I was talking about this in the Patreon chat, I think yesterday, but a lot of places are coming out with these primitive hunting seasons with the straight wall cartridges, making these kind of quasi rifles that aren't primitive at all, right? The 350 Legend in a brand new Henry break open rifle, there's nothing really classic about that. Not the same Henry company, it's not a cartridge that wasn't around a long time ago. If you wanted a challenge, I would like to see a state come out with what I'd call a retro hunt, where you can't wear camo. You don't need all the marketing hype and everything to kill deer. A retro hunt where you wear khakis or jeans and a red or green or whatever color plaid flannel shirt and a Jones hat. And you have an old school iron sighted lever action or bolt action rifle and a good hunting knife and some woodsmanship, and you go out and harvest game that way like our forefathers did. I would much rather see that as a hunting season. I'd like to see that become a trend. Maybe have it open a week before deer season. There's nothing wrong with the new technology hunting. I'm not going to put it down, but if you want the new Gucci Flage of the season and the 18-pound rifle with the super big scope and ride around on a quad, that's cool. Like, you do you. I would much rather see people doing that than sitting on Netflix. But I think it'd be really cool to see hunters get back in the woods with their flannel shirts. I remember my dad hunting in a flannel shirt and jeans, I think. A pair of rubber boots. I'd like to see guys get back out in the woods and realize they don't need all this fancy stuff to kill deer. It's a good iron-sighted 270 or 30-06 or a lever-action 30-30 and a flannel shirt and a pair of jeans. Putting meat on the table for their family. I'd like to see a hunting season like that. And not get rid of the other stuff, but just, it'd be nice to see. Anyway, those are my thoughts. The tactical verse of the day. Was reading 1 John this morning laying in bed. A blessed man with my wife and my dog. Our 100 and some pound Rhodesian Ridgeback alarm clock. And was reading 1 John, so I'm going to read it with you. Whoever committeth sin transgresseth also the law, for sin is transgression of the law. And we know that he was manifested to take away our sins, and in him is no sin. Whoever abideth in him sinneth not. Whosoever sinneth has not seen him, neither known him. Little children, let no man deceive you. He that doeth righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. He that committeth sin is of the devil, for the devil sinneth from the beginning. Anyway, some theological meat to chew on today. More important, for it is written, man shall not live by bread alone. Tactical tip of the day, talking about these classic cartridges and reloading. I don't often mention products as a tactical tip, but I'm going to, and I get no sponsors, no kickbacks. This is like the old school PBS, supported by viewers like you. Which I'd be a bad capitalist to say that if you want to support the podcast, consider becoming a patron. They get some cool insider content. They get some episodes early and without commercials. Also get the opportunity to be part of the insider chat where we talk to each other. Or if you want to support, I don't often mention it, but goodshepherdtraining.com, there's a merchandise on there. If you want some cool stuff that's on there, you can check that out. But anyway, the tactical tip for the day is going to be a thing, and I don't sell it, and I don't get any kickbacks from it, but it's the Lee Anniversary Reloading Kit. If you've thought about getting into reloading, it's not brain surgery. It's not super complicated. You could interview my wife and she would tell you I am not known for gentleness nor attention to detail, but I have done a lot of reloading because I know if it's important I'll pay attention. If you can pay attention at least to the steps that are crucially important, like how much powder you're putting in there, it's a pretty safe hobby. Probably safer than driving down the road to get to work if you drive to work. And if you've thought about getting into reloading, components and stuff have started to come back, so now might be a good time to do it. Reloading something like a 270. Maybe because you want a specialty load that's not available. Maybe you want to load a certain design of 150 grain .277 caliber bullets, or you want to go super light. Or you just want to put meat on the table with a load that you made yourself. Or it's another cartridge that's crazy expensive to buy factory ammo, like a 45-70, but very, very, one of the most affordable, especially if you cast your own lead and can salvage lead from wheel weights or something, one of the most affordable to reload for. There's a lot of reasons to reload. The Lee Anniversary Kit is a good starter way to do that. They're not crazy expensive. If you shoot quite a bit, it'll probably pay for itself. If you shoot stuff other than .223 9mm, because honestly it's hard to do that cheaper, especially if you consider paying yourself for the time, than it is to buy it. But cartridges like the 270 and the 45-70 and things like that can quickly make up that difference. I would highly recommend do not get started reloading. Again, do not get started reloading on a progressive press. You may experience bald spots from pulling out your hair. I like progressive presses once I have my load and I know it, but getting started, get a single stage press, and I think one of the best values is the Lee Anniversary. And if you decide later you want something else, it's good to have a separate single stage press to work up loads and things like that. They're a lot easier to do that on than a progressive. If you want to get started into reloading, that Lee Anniversary Kit. Anyway, that is your tactical tip of the day. Get out there, be strong, prove yourself a man, and have a blessed day.